I'm delighted to be joined by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk first of all about President Trump's latest comments towards particularly President Zelenskyy personally. A dictator who's refusing elections, he said. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, first of all, that's wrong. President Zelenskyy is not a dictator. And, you know, let's just put some context to this. For 3 years, the third anniversary of the conflict is on Monday. For 3 years, he has led his nation in in terms of this conflict, just standing up to Putin's aggression and the appalling conduct that we've seen. He's fighting for sovereignty and freedom of his country. And this is a significant conflict in our neighbourhood, effectively, on European soil. And this is the most brutal conflict that we've seen in Europe since, clearly, the Second World War. So he is a man that's fighting for sovereignty, freedom, and actually standing up for the rule of law and many of the values that we all hold very dearly.
Why is President Trump saying that, do you think?
Well, we don't know. We don't know. And, you know, I don't think I can comment on his motivation. What I can say, though, is he has made some very significant points consistently, in all credit to President Trump, about Europe and Europe stepping up when it comes to defence spending. I heard that clearly at the weekend when I was at the Munich Security Conference. And I genuinely think now is that moment where Britain, which our country has led in terms of our support for Ukraine, we should now look to show some leadership when it comes to defence spending, corralling our European allies, NATO, leading NATO, to basically say to our NATO allies as well in Europe, this is our moment again. Yes, to continue the support towards the people of Ukraine, President Zelenskyy, Ukraine in this conflict, but also step up on that entire agenda of military security and defence.
But it's so interesting because, you know, and I saw your interview with Trevor on Sunday, and if we were having this interview on Sunday or even Monday, I could see the framing that you've got there. Net, we support President Trump's rhetoric. He's got an end in sight. But it's come every single night overnight, increasing barrage of attacks on Zelenskyy personally. Has it not gone beyond just trying to corral Europe to spend a bit more?
No, I don't think so.
But he is questioning the legitimacy of President Zelenskyy.
Well, first of all, you've got to recognise as well that the US Special Envoy to Ukraine is actually in Ukraine right now, General Kellogg. And I was at some events with him at the weekend as well. And I think actually that'll help inform the White House going forward, but potentially try and inform some of the debates and discussions, potential talks going forward as well. It's very early days. And I think I said at the weekend too that there is a lot of chatter, there's a lot of noise. There are no clear solutions right now. And I think, you know, I say this not just as a member of the Conservative front bench, but actually as a British politician. Having led the support for Ukraine, this is why we must really be quite strong all over again in our support for greater defence and military spending and capability. President Trump in particular has not just singled us out, but other European countries and NATO allies. I think we have to be part of the solution here. In terms of working with the government, my party had a plan to increase defence spending. We'll be very keen to work with the government on that. But the macro point here is to show some firm and strong leadership with our European allies and within NATO to say that, look, war in Europe is not acceptable. This has been going on for 3 years. There are better ways. We want to be part of the solution. I think President Trump actually wants to work with allies that can be part of the solution. And I'm basically saying I think Britain should be at that table, putting forward new suggestions and ideas.
Do you presumably wish the Prime Minister every luck, every success next week in trying to get President Trump on the same page as what?
Of course I do. It's in our interest.
Tough job he's got next week.
It's in all our interest. It really is. You've already heard me say this war in Europe, this is the most brutal conflict since the Second World War. We're seeing people, Ukrainians, die for their freedom and their sovereignty. We've backed them and we've supported them, and we should continue to do that. Yes, these are difficult geopolitical times. We all recognise that, which is why we want to be constructive with the government in finding solutions to this conflict, ending this conflict, but also finding solutions to increase our defence spending. It is difficult. It is absolutely difficult. But there'll never be a smooth pathway. You know, you always have to have probably some tough talks behind closed doors, but be based upon working with each other and ultimately ensuring that Ukraine's voice is heard. The people of Ukraine have that say and they're determining their own futures.
One thing that the Prime Minister started the conversation on was boots on the ground in Ukraine. Our Deborah Haynes reporting that conversations negotiations, particularly between the UK and France, but across Europe, for 30,000 troops on the ground in Ukraine, more as a reassurance force and around critical sites like cities, ports and nuclear power stations. If we got to that point, would the Conservatives back the government?
So I think, first of all, I heard that on Monday. I think that came around the time of the Paris talks that President Macron held. I think we need to understand more detail. You know, again, we'd work constructively with the government. We'd ask the questions. We're not at that stage yet, so it's far too premature, but we'd need to understand the details and the substance. And, you know, these are fair points to fly right now in terms of suggestions, but I think at this stage it's far too premature. As I've said, General Kellogg, the US Special Envoy, is only in Ukraine now. The Americans will obviously be taking some information. General Kellogg may even go to the front line, which I think will help inform things going forward. I think it is far too premature to even commit to suggestions of that nature. But of course, we will happily be part of those discussions and conversations with the Labour government here.
Your former boss, Boris Johnson, had an interesting tweet yesterday. We've covered some of the themes in it already without addressing his tweet directly. One that I wanted to bring up, which was that he is saying the US can see 300 billion of frozen Russian compensation to compensate the US for its support. We all know about this 300 billion. It hasn't been mentioned. It's the first time I've heard it mentioned this week, specifically by Donald Trump. Have you heard that? Does Donald Trump want that released? And released not back to Russia, but to Europe, Ukraine and the US?
So I've not heard that, and even at the security conference, that was not a topic there. But I think we should be very clear about a few things here. Number one, sanctions against Russia, Putin's brutal regime. We've led the way. And in fact, I was in government at the time. We worked with our American counterparts on freezing assets and taking the strongest possible steps. And in fact, it was Boris's government at the time that took that across Europe as well. We have to continue to strain every sinew to look at how assets can be leveraged in any particular way to step up the support for Ukraine. I mean, that's what this is about. And my understanding is that in recent years, loans were given to Ukraine off the back of some asset seizures. But it's complicated, and I think the government, again, need to look at how that could be made possible.
Shadow Foreign Secretary, these are latest pictures coming through. I hope you don't mind me just asking to pause and perhaps get your reaction to it. This is coming in from the International Red Cross, coming in from Khan Younis.
Yeah.
These pictures are, of course, as Israeli bodies are preparing to receive the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages. It's a somber day ahead, Shadow Foreign Secretary. These are the latest pictures. What sort of thoughts do you have as we watch this?
So, you know, our heart breaks for the families. This has been such a terrible, terrible moment of anticipation for these families. The news is devastating, no question about that. It does also remind us, obviously, of October the 7th and the sheer brutality that was unleashed towards Israel at that particular time. I think, you know, we are absolutely shoulder to shoulder with the families and the people of Israel. And looking at these pictures, we've always known it could come to this point. We've known that since the ceasefire was announced and the phases of the ceasefire. I think, you know, at this particular time, we grieve with them. This is a shocking, shocking day, a very sombre day, and all our thoughts and condolences are with the families and the people of Israel.
Shadow Foreign Secretary, thank you so much for joining us today. Good to see you. Dame Priti Patel.